What is up, internet friends? It's Jason back with another episode of On the Wall with Jiu Jitsu Five-O. Today's podcast is brought to you by Boxed Wine. Are you too cheap to buy wine in a glass bottle? Or do you not want your neighbors to think that you are a complete alcoholic on recycling day? Boxed Wine. All right, now that we got our sponsorships out of the way, let's get into today's topic. So today we're going to talk about 10 reasons why it's important for you to train on your own time as an instructor. So if you are an instructor really in any discipline, I'm going to really talk about it as a use of force instructor or a combative tactics instructor, but really in any discipline, we're going to cover 10 reasons why you need to be training on your own time. Now, there's probably a lot more reasons than that, but I'm going to focus on what I feel are probably the 10 most important. So let's get into it. Number one, and this is probably the most important reason why you need to train on your own time as a use of force instructor, is credibility with your officers or with the people that you're teaching this skill to or these skills to. So having credibility obviously is very important for lots of reasons, right? I think the biggest reason as it relates to police training or use of force training, if you don't have credibility with the people that you're teaching, because you don't train on your own time, the folks that you're teaching, they know that, they can see through it. And if you instantly lose credibility with the people that you're teaching, they're not going to pay attention in class. They're not going to be as engaged as they would be if they knew that you were a credible instructor. And as we know, most cops, that have to attend any training, but especially defensive tactics training in their agency's biannual or annual use of force training day, they already feel like they're being held hostage, right? They don't want to be there. They have to come on their day off, and they hate it, right? So if all of those things are true, which they are for most police departments and most cops in my experience, if nobody wants to be there, now I also have to listen to an instructor teach me tactics that they, learned at a 5-day class or a 1-day class or whatever it is that they learn these things from, knowing that they don't have any sort of background in what they're teaching me and they don't do it outside of the police department. It's just kind of a waste of everybody's time. And, they're not going to look at you as a credible instructor, and it's just going to make them hate the training. Number two, training on your own time helps you set an example. So as we know, most cops are not motivated to train on their own time at all. They show up for the 1-day defensive tactics class that they instantly hate. They don't want to be there. And if you can show up as an instructor who is training on your own time and learning tactics, you're leading by example. And you may be surprised at how many other officers out there that you're teaching or within your agency are looking at you and seeing that, and maybe it motivates them to train, and they're like, hey, this person is out there doing it. They're doing it on their own time. They've figured out a way to train on their own schedule. Maybe they're spending their own money if the department's not paying for it, which is pretty common. Personally, I've found this to be true as an instructor for a lot of years. When, I was teaching tactics to cops at my agency, they would see that, hey, Jason's out there doing this by himself. He's paying for it on his own dime. He's training on his own time. And there have been multiple people that started training jiu-jitsu that I've talked to that have told me directly, like, hey, you motivated me to start training on my own time. And I take a lot of pride in that, because obviously I wanted to set an example and lead by example as an instructor. And if you are not training on your own time and you're only doing the bare minimum, you're not really setting a great example for the people that you're teaching. You're not leading by example. And I think if you're in front of a group of cops saying, you should be doing this, you should be training these tactics, et cetera, but you're not actually doing that in your own life and leading by example, again, it kind of goes back to point number one, where you're going to lose credibility with those cops that you're teaching, or whoever it is that you're teaching. And so I think training on your own time, really helps you as an instructor lead by example. So number three, training on your own time is going to keep you ahead of most of your students. Unless you have somebody that, in your PD who's already like a high-level Jiu Jitsu Black Belt, that happens as well. I've talked to people that are not instructors because their agency or administrators thought that they were too qualified to teach, combative tactics, which is absolutely absurd to me. But those instances are very few and far between. It's not common for agencies to have really high-level grapplers that are also not instructors. It does happen, but not, it's not likely. So if you are an instructor that's training on your own time, you can stay ahead of your students in terms of skill level. And I think that's really important because, if you're, again, tasked with teaching a certain set of skills to people that don't really know otherwise, you can't be on the same playing field as them. You can't have the same skill level as them. You need to have a higher understanding of what it is that you're teaching. You need to be able to perform those tasks better than they would be able to do them. As they're learning. In jiu-jitsu, there's obviously a reason why white belts are not teaching other white belts. You won't see a white belt who's brand new to the art leading a class and teaching other white belts. It's because they both are, in the same playing field. They both have the same or similar sets of skills, and no one is really going to learn anything if, you're learning from someone that is just as I don't want to say clueless because that sounds like, I'm putting you down if you don't know anything. So that's not the right word. But if you don't really know what you're talking about or how to perform certain things, or your base skill level is the exact same as everyone else's at your PD, why are you teaching them? What makes you qualified to teach them this particular set of skills? So when you train on your own time, you obviously are going to gain an advantage of having a higher skill set than the people that you're teaching. Now, are you going to be way more skilled than the people that you're teaching? Probably not. I mean, that will happen over time, but even if you're just starting out as an instructor and you start training on your own time and, do that consistently for, let's say, a year, you're going to be so much further ahead than the students that, you're teaching combative tactics to than if you are someone that just went to the 5-day, 40-hour paper certificate class and that's the only training that you have. Well, anyone can go to one of those classes and, get a certification, which is fine. Those things have their place, obviously, and they're needed and necessary. But if you don't do anything beyond that, your skill level is going to remain basically the same as your students. And the other side to that is the consistency aspect. If you're only going to that one class for 5 days every 2 years, you're going to forget everything that you learned. It's just a fact. Like if you're not practicing it consistently outside on your own time, you will forget pretty much everything that you learned. And so again, your skill level is not going to be really at all greater than the people that you're teaching. So it's really important to train on your own time for that reason. Stay ahead of your students, make sure that your skills are above where they are at. Reason number 4 to train on your own time kind of ties back into reason number 3, but number 4 being develop your own set of skills and your retention. So I talked a little bit about how if you take a class, and I'm using the 5-day, 40-hour certification classes as an example, because obviously that's an industry-wide standard that we usually send our instructors to. They go to a 5-day class, it's 40 total hours. They complete it, they get a paper certificate, and then typically most instructors are not training on their own time to continue developing their skills or knowledge retention outside of that class. So they get the paper certificate, they're now, certified to teach this particular set of tactics or techniques that they learn in this class. Maybe they go to a recertification class 2 years later when it's time for the training company to collect more money from the agency. But if that's the only level of training that you're doing, the retention's not going to be there. I've seen it happen. I've experienced this where I've gone to, a one-off class, even sometimes at jiu-jitsu seminars. If you're newer to jiu-jitsu and you go learn something, or maybe if you're not newer to jiu-jitsu, but you go to like a 1-day, 2-day seminar, it's very common to leave that seminar that you paid money for and forget everything that you learned. You might retain it for a little bit, maybe like a couple days after the seminar, but unless you recorded it on video or the instructor recorded on video so you have some point of reference to go back and study, you're going to forget it. And so that could not be more true in police training. Instructors, this happens to them all the time. They go to the 5-day, 40-hour class. A week later, they pretty much have forgotten everything that they learned in that class. And now they're tasked with teaching it back to the officers at their agency. And you kind of see how that is a broken system, and it's been broken for a really long time. So if you want to improve your skills, which is obviously really important if you are an instructor, and retain the things that you are learning, you have to do it consistently. I don't know why I want to keep saying consistency. Anyway, I did not have any box wine before I filmed this podcast, I promise. If you're not training it consistently, you're not going to continue improving and retaining the things that you're learning. It's just a fact. That's how we learn stuff, is by doing it over and over and over and over again. 5 days is not enough time to do that every 2 years, obviously. So reason number 4, as an instructor, train on your own time, because it's going to help you improve your skills and, most importantly, your retention of those skills, so you can then go and teach it back to the people that you're tasked with teaching it to. Reason number 5 to train on your own time is you are going to learn what works and what doesn't. Now, I said point number 1 about having credibility as an instructor being probably one of the most important. I would put this point up in that same category. This is a really important thing to remember, that, a lot of instructors that don't train on their own time are going to fall short in this specific categories. Understanding what works and what doesn't is obviously a really important thing as it relates to police use of force training, right? So if I go to again, going back to that example, 5-day, 40-hour class, and I've been to these classes where I've learned techniques that have absolutely no place in a real world fight, right? So, and I'm sure you've experienced something like this before, been to a class or a seminar where you learn something and you're like, I don't think that would ever work. Now, it's okay to question those things, and it's not to say that instructors that show these techniques that they didn't have their heart in the right place or their motivations were flawed. But again, it usually comes from a place where they are not training on their own time. They don't train on their own time. And so you take a police training course from a, master instructor or someone who has their own proprietary system of techniques that they invented. Side note, I think that's a big red flag if you come across training that someone invented techniques, because really none of us are inventing anything new. We might be modifying certain, techniques and tactics for the street or for whatever application, but all of this stuff came from somewhere. Martial arts have been around for a really long time, and none of us are actually inventing anything brand new. So that's always a red flag to me. But understanding what works and what doesn't, you're not going to if you don't train on your own time. And these companies, or not even companies, but instructors that will teach a tactic or teach a technique, and they've never pressure tested it. Maybe they haven't done it in full gear. Maybe they haven't done it in an actual training environment against, a fully resisting opponent. Those things are really important. Now, the gear side of things, we could talk another podcast episode about training in gear, which is important. It doesn't always have to be in gear, but pressure testing things in terms of seeing if it's going to work against a fully resisting opponent, that absolutely is necessary. And you're not going to do that if you're not grappling or training on a regular basis on your own time. And so I can't count the number of times where I've seen, a technique on the internet, or I've rolled with somebody who saw some technique on the internet that they wanted to try on the mat. And, I've done this myself. I'm like, oh, that looks really cool. I'm going to try it. And over time, I've tried it over and over again, and I realize it has absolutely no value and it just doesn't work. Or maybe it works occasionally, but it doesn't really have a high percentage of working in a grappling environment against a fully resisting opponent. So if something only works 1 out of 20 times, well, that's probably not going to be a technique that you're going to want to put, into your curriculum to teach cops, especially if they're out there, in real world settings, getting into actual fights, and you taught them something that has, a 1 to 5% chance of working in an actual fight is not a good thing for obvious reasons. So if you don't train on your own time as an instructor, you're not going to understand what works, what doesn't, and also why those things either do or do not work. That's another really important thing, because students are going to ask you questions Well, why wouldn't you just do this? Why couldn't you just, do it this way? So understanding what works and what doesn't is a huge benefit that you're going to get out of training on your own time. Reason number 6 to train on your own time as an instructor is you're going to be a more effective communicator. Now, this is probably an underrated benefit of training on your own time, is that it does teach you how to sort of effectively communicate the things that you're teaching. You learn by proxy a lot of times, especially if you have a really good instructor. I've been fortunate enough to train under some really legit, great instructors over my jiu-jitsu journey, over the last however many years, 13, 14 years that it's been now that I've been training. But I've had the opportunity to train under some really good instructors, and I find that my teaching style, I kind of borrow different things unintentionally from those really great instructors. So, my first instructor, Damien, he's really good at simplifying things. So even if it's a very complex technique that he's showing us in like the advanced class or whatever, he has he's really good at simplifying the technique and explaining it in a way that can just make sense for anyone who's learning it. So whether that's a white belt or a high-level black belt, everyone can sort of understand that. And I didn't realize that until I kind of got into teaching more and more, that I was finding myself explaining things a lot simpler. And I attribute that to learning under Damien for so many years because he was so good at it. And I picked up some of that stuff. Now, you're going to develop your own teaching style. I'm not saying, go copy your instructor or your favorite teacher. That's not what I'm saying, right? So what I am saying is that you are going to pick up on little cues from the people that you train under, and it's going to make you a better instructor, again, if you have really great instructors. But beyond that, just, as you progress and get better, you're going to start to show newer grapplers things. Someone might come to you and ask you for, questions on how to do a particular technique, and you'll start finding yourself answering their questions, demonstrating techniques, how you would do stuff. So you get a little bit of instructor practice just by training, right? And now if you also take it one step further, and maybe you are a cop who trains on your own time, and you start a weekly grappling club at your agency, or you start a law enforcement training class or a first responder training class at your gym that you teach, that can just give you additional practice communicating and teaching techniques and tactics. It will just make you a better instructor, in the end. So again, reason number 6 to train on your own time, you're going to learn how to be a more effective communicator and how to be a better teacher, better coach, better instructor just by doing it. Reason number 7 to train on your own time is you're going to be able to create more realistic scenarios and drills. So, most use of force instructors are probably involved with their scenario-based training at their department. And I can't count how many times I've been involved in scenario-based training where the scenario is just unrealistic. It has nothing to do with any encounters or scenarios that we've been involved in on the street. And, the people in charge of the training are looking for specific responses so they can check a box. And that happens all the time, right? One thing that I do when I teach my law enforcement class, or even if you come to one of our in-person training classes, is we do a lot of like positional training. We do a lot of drilling. And so what I've learned through training on my own time over the years, and just also being on the street, obviously, is like common scenarios that we find ourselves in. So I'm always looking for, drawing from my own experience, talking to my other instructors, other cops on the street, watching training videos. I'm always looking for what are like the common things that we find ourselves involved in. What are some common things that suspects are doing when we're grabbing onto them and getting in fights? And I think, there's a lot of commonalities there that you can design your training around. One example is like a common headlock, right? So I've rolled with new grapplers who don't know anything. I like doing that because I learn specific things. Like I learn what they are thinking about doing in a fight. And I've had, newer white belts try to like put me in an old school, just bully headlock from the ground, right? Now, I know how to get out of that. There's a lot of ways to get out of headlocks, but it's interesting when you train on your own time, especially with people that are just starting out. You start to learn, kind of how they react to things and what they might do. And then you can take that and apply it to your training, because you've learned through training on your own time how people are going to act in specific situations, how they're going to respond. And then you can take that and put it into drills and put it into your scenario-based training to make it realistic, right? So, and when I say train on your own time, it doesn't just mean go to the jiu-jitsu gym and train jiu-jitsu. Training can be, it can involve a lot of different things. Obviously, the biggest part of that is going to a jiu-jitsu gym and training on your own time, but watch videos. Look at police incidents that happen on the street. Look for common themes. Look for ways or ideas of things that you might be able to do differently, or tactics that you can teach for that specific scenario, because that just gives things context as you go back and teach your police department or whatever. It can put things into context, and it can make it feel more realistic to the people that are learning. I understand why you're teaching this to us. So having the ability to create more realistic drills and scenarios is huge. And you will absolutely learn that by training on your own time. And again, training does not have to just mean being on the mats and training jiu-jitsu. That's the biggest part of it. But training on your own time can also include watching videos, watching incident videos, studying technique videos, right? So if you're not on the mats, what can I do to continue learning different techniques? What can I do to learn about common reactions that suspects do from the ground? You can find that stuff online. Obviously, we have a bunch of that content in our training app as well. But that's a huge benefit of training on your own time, is just being able to take what you've learned and apply it in a training environment to make that training as realistic as possible. Reason number 8 to train on your own time as an instructor is that it's going to build your confidence in your teaching abilities. And I think that's a huge benefit, right? So if you are an instructor and you're teaching a group of people and you're up there and you are sort of like, well, I learned this technique from this class that I took. I don't really remember all of the steps, but I think it went like this. You're instantly going to lose your audience. And again, going back to point number 1, you're probably going to lose all credibility as an instructor with the people that you're teaching. You need to be confident in what you're teaching. You need to be able to effectively show little details of techniques. You need to be able to put things into context and let people know why it would or would not work. You need to be able to answer questions and be confident and comfortable if people do raise their hand, because as we know, especially in a police training room, there are always going to be the naysayers, right? There's going to be the people that sit in the back of the room that are being held hostage, that want to just shit on everything that you're teaching. They're going to ask the most ridiculous questions. They're going to say, well, I would just do this. I would never take the fight to the ground. I mean, I don't know how many times I've heard that in a training room, and I still hear it to this day. I'm not going to go on a anger-fueled rage tangent about how we would never take the fight to the ground and how I address those comments. But see, now I'm too mad. Now I'm losing my train of thought because I thought about that particular comment. But let's go back to being confident in your teaching abilities, right? You're not going to learn how to be confident, or you're not going to be confident if the only training you have is a 5-day certification class every 2 years. You can't build your confidence as an instructor that way. Now think about if you are on the mats 3 days a week, and it doesn't have to be 3 days a week. I'm using that as an example, but let's say you train 3 days a week, every week, and you do that year after year. You will be amazed at how confident you are in teaching, especially fundamental grappling tactics, to a room full of people. Now, obviously, if you hate public speaking or you don't like talking to small groups, that's something that you're going to have to work on as well. But again, we talked about that earlier. You're going to build those skills as well, just through training, because you're around people, you're answering questions from, lower belt ranks. Maybe you're helping teach a class with your instructor who's using you as a partner to demonstrate the techniques on. So you get a little bit of that experience anyway. But if you're not confident in what you're teaching, you're going to lose credibility. No one's going to want to listen to it. And you're just not going to be that effective as an instructor. So Train on your own time so you can build up your confidence and your abilities to be able to teach the material that you're tasked with teaching. And that's it. Reason number 9 to train on your own time as an instructor is that you're going to get respect from your bosses and your peers, right? So respect goes a long way, as we know. Reputation goes a long way, especially in law enforcement. And so if you don't have any respect because maybe you don't take training seriously, you don't train on your own time, you show up with a negative attitude when it comes time to actually teach on whatever given day you're told that you have to teach, all of those things can come into play and you're just not going to have a lot of respect. And again, I keep going back to point 1, but you're going to lose credibility, which just in turn loses your audience and makes people not want to learn anything from you. So training on your own time, people will absolutely see that. Your bosses will see that. Your peers will see that. And it will gain you a level of respect that I feel is needed as an instructor. Because again, if you don't have respect from your peers and from your bosses, you're probably not going to be a very effective instructor in whatever discipline is that you teach. And also, if people respect you, the other big thing is that they're going to want to listen to you. They're probably going to also be more motivated to ask you questions and go to you as a resource if you're respected. If you have zero respect or credibility, no one's going to want to ask you questions. No one's going to want to learn from you. And it's kind of just a big waste of everybody's time. And then finally, reason number 10, why to train on your own time is because as an instructor, you are in a really important position. Whether you believe that or want to believe that or not, you are tasked with teaching people a set of skills that could potentially save their life or save someone else's life. And if you don't take that seriously, there is no reason for you to be teaching it to begin with. So training on your own time helps you develop those skills and refine your own skills so that you know when it comes time to teach that you're teaching the right things, you're teaching the right techniques, you're teaching things that you firmly believe have value, and you're not just regurgitating something that you learned at a 5-day class 3 years ago or that you saw on the internet, whatever the case might be. If you're training on your own time, you're developing a level of skills and knowledge that you can then go back to your agency with and again, have the potential to save somebody's life. I have personal stories. I get a ton of messages online. I have a whole library full of, DMs that people have sent me. It said, and this isn't me bragging, this is just something that I'm really proud of because I do put a lot of time and effort into training on my own time. And I put a lot of time and effort into the content that I put out on the internet when I show a technique or I show a tactic. I never just put stuff out because I think it looks cool or I think it's going to give me views or follows or likes. I'm putting it out there because I hope I hope people that are watching it find value in it, or the people that I'm teaching at an in-person class find value in the things that I'm putting out there, and that it can in turn help save their ass on the street. So I have a whole library of messages from people all over, people I've never met in person that said, hey Jason, I watched this video and briefing and we ended up getting into the exact same scenario that night. And we used the technique that you showed and it worked great and it helped everybody out. And it saved us a lot of time and energy with big, papers, or not papers, but reports. And I have other messages of, hey, that Kimura arm lock that you showed worked awesome today. I had a guy reaching for a gun. We were able to secure his arm with this tactics that you showed us, and it saved my life. And I've got a bunch of those messages, and it makes me feel really, really good as an instructor because that's exactly that's my mission. That's why I put this stuff out. That's why I train on my own time. And if I didn't train on my own time and I was just regurgitating stuff that I learned again in some class 3 years ago, because that's the way we've always done it, or that's what my agency told me that I'm supposed to be teaching, it just does everybody a huge disservice. No one's learning anything. And it is a really important job. And I think instructors need to understand that and take that job more seriously. If you're not passionate about defensive tactics training or use of force training, and you're only doing it because maybe you got a little bit of a pay increase, or maybe it comes with some other incentives, within your agency, and that's why you're doing it, just step down, step down from the position and go do something else and let someone else who has a passion for it step up and do it, because it is a really important role, whether you think that or not, or whether you agree with me or not. If you're teaching people how to get out of a choke or a headlock, and you're teaching them wrong, and you don't actually know how to get out of it because you've never trained it under resistance, you've never pressure tested it, but you taught somebody a specific technique that this class showed that had no value because the trainer of the class doesn't train or pressure test anything. Now that officer learns this, they find themselves in a certain situation where someone puts them in a headlock or choke, and they're trying whatever it is that you show them and it's not working. You can see how fucked up that can be, right? So training on your own time just is going to make you a better instructor, and it carries a lot of weight because people are depending on you. Now, you're not going to like have everybody in your agency. There's probably not going to be a time where everybody trains jiu-jitsu or everybody trains consistently on their own time, right? I'm realistic about that. I wish that wasn't the case, but we all know that there's probably never going to be a time where it's like jiu-jitsu is mandatory and that every agency mandates their officers to train it. That would be fucking amazing, but it's probably not ever going to be the reality. However, if you are an instructor and you have a limited amount of time to train your cops, how are you utilizing that time? That might even be a little like number 11 reason why to train on your own time, is you understand how to structure your training. You understand how, if I only have a 4-hour block or an 8-hour training day, let's say, to teach whatever techniques, well, how are you going to utilize that time? What can you do? What can you focus on specifically to help the people that you're teaching, right? So that's just like a side note, something to think about. But at the end of the day, reason number 10, it's a very, very important job. You're in a position to teach potentially life-saving skills, and you need to take that seriously. And the only way to really take it seriously is by going and doing it, not just showing up and getting, a certification. And I should say too, as we kind of wind down and end this episode of the podcast, I used examples of the 40 certification courses kind of throughout my different talking points here, but I'm not at all shitting on those classes because they're needed, they're necessary. I actually have an instructor level course put together, but what I will say is if you take those classes, any classes for that matter, whether it's a 40-hour instructor certification class or if it's a 2-day, like we have a 2-day vehicle extraction class, for example, all of those classes should be a supplement to a more consistent training schedule. So for example, let's say you train 1 or 2 days of jiu-jitsu a week, and then you go to the 40-hour class and you go take my vehicle extraction class. Maybe you go to a jiu-jitsu seminar, right? But you're training consistently on your own time. You're going to get way more out of those courses and out of those classes that you spend your hard-earned time and money on than if you're just going to them to go through the motions and to check your agency's box and to get a certificate that says you're qualified. I would argue, and I think a lot of instructors that are in the game and have been around for a while understand this as well and would agree with me. If you get a certificate that says you're qualified to teach something, but your only level of training outside of that is nothing, and you've only gone to a 5-day class and you haven't done anything else outside on your own time in the last 2 years, you're not qualified to teach that thing. You're just not. Sometimes the truth hurts, and I'm not trying to sound like a bad guy or shit on the people that aren't training consistently on their own time, but imagine any skill, right? Like I play the guitar, I'm not good at it. I am an aspiring rock star, but I am not good at the guitar. It's a hobby of mine. But I have taken some lessons in the past, and when I look for an instructor to learn the guitar, I'm not looking for someone that played the guitar for 5 days 2 years ago and has not picked it up since then. They're not going to be able to teach me anything. I want the person who has been playing for, 15 years, has played in bands, maybe they write their own music, they play the guitar every day. That's the person that I want to teach me because they know what they're doing. And I can belabor this point forever and use a million other examples like that, but if you're tasked with teaching a specific skill and you're not training in that skill, you are not qualified to teach it to anybody. So something to think about. I really appreciate you tuning in. As always, subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening to this podcast on your radio, I guess you could call it. I don't know, I'm old. If you're in your car, listen to the audio version of this. Feel free to check out our YouTube channel. Go subscribe. You can also find us all over the internet on Instagram, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. And as always, please go check out the Jiu Jitsu Five-O training app. We put out a ton of training content there so you can supplement your training and learn new techniques for the street. We've got full-on courses there. We have breakdown videos. There's a lot of things that we learn. We spent a lot of time and energy putting that together, and I think it really has a lot of value. There's different membership levels for you. You can access content on your phone or computer. Go check it out, app.jujitsu50.com if you want to sign up online, or go find it in the App Store, both for iOS and Android. And we'd love to have you as a member and help you out in any way that we can. Thanks again for joining today's episode of the podcast. And as always, go train,